She was a single mother, fired on her last night at a small diner, yet still served a late customer with a smile. The next day, that customer, Keanu Reeves, received news so shocking it would change both their lives forever. What happened between them that rainy night? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Rain drummed steadily against the wide front windows of the Silver Spoon Cafe, each drop tracing a glistening path down the glass before vanishing into the dark puddles on the sidewalk. The sign above the door still glowed faintly, its neon letters flickering in protest against the storm. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee grounds and the last batch of cornbread cooling in the kitchen. The usual hum of chatter was gone. Only silence lingered, broken occasionally by the hiss of the coffee machine and the gentle clink of plates being stacked away. Alana Brooks wiped down the same counter she'd cleaned 100 times before, her movements slow and deliberate. At 28, she carried herself with a calm resilience, but her eyes betrayed the heaviness pressing against her heart. Tonight was her final shift. By morning, the cafe would be nothing more than another boarded-up storefront in New Orleans, another casualty of rent hikes and dwindling customers, and with its closing, she would lose the only job that had kept her afloat. Her mind drifted to Malik, her 7-year-old son, asleep at home in the care of Mrs. Green from next door. Malik's asthma medication sat in a small white bottle on the kitchen counter. There was barely enough left to get through the week. Every time she opened the bottle, she felt the reminder of the price printed on the pharmacy label, a number she could no longer afford without the steady paycheck from this place. She tried not to think about what she would tell him in the morning. Malik believed his mom could fix anything. He had a way of looking at her with quiet trust that made her want to believe it, too. But tonight, there was no fixing the truth. Once the doors closed for good, she had no backup plan, no savings big enough to buy time, and no other job lined up that would let her be home when Malik's attacks came without warning. The wall clock above the register ticked past 9:30, half an hour to go. Outside, the street was nearly empty, rainwater rippling under the glow of a single street lamp. Alana gathered a tray of silverware to wrap for the last time, her hands working out of habit. The cafe was more than a job. It was a second home. The worn booths, the old jukebox in the corner, even the stubborn espresso machine that sputtered when it felt like it. They had been her constant companions for years. She reached for a clean rag to start wiping the windows, thinking of nothing more than finishing her shift quietly, when the door's bell gave a sharp, unexpected jingle. Alana glanced up, startled. The wind had picked up outside, and the rain blew in sideways as the door eased open. A tall figure stepped in, pulling the hood of a dark sweatshirt back from his face. Droplets clung to his hair, and his jeans were damp from the walk. He paused just inside, scanning the quiet diner with eyes that seemed both tired and cautious, as if measuring whether he belonged here at all. "We're still open," Alana said gently, her voice carrying over the soft hum of the refrigerator in the back. She set the rag aside and smoothed her apron, instinctively shifting into hostess mode despite the near-empty room. The man gave a faint nod, his expression unreadable, and stepped toward one of the window tables. He carried himself with an unassuming presence, yet there was something about him that made her feel she'd seen him before, though she couldn't place it. His shoulders were slightly hunched, not from the cold, but from something heavier. As he sat, Alana noticed the fine lines etched at the corners of his eyes, not the marks of age so much as the imprint of years lived under scrutiny. She brought him a menu, her practiced smile meeting his reserved demeanor. "Coffee to start?" she asked. "That would be great," he replied, his voice warm yet low, the kind of tone that carried weight even in small talk. She poured from the fresh pot, letting the rich scent fill the space between them. Outside, the rain softened into a steady curtain, the lamplight catching the droplets like beads of glass. The man wrapped his hands around the mug as if savoring the warmth more than the drink itself. "You've got the place to yourself tonight," Alana said, motioning to the empty booths. "Peaceful," he murmured, glancing toward the window, as if the darkness beyond held its own conversation. She almost told him it was her last shift, that the cafe would be gone tomorrow. Instead, she simply waited, sensing that whatever brought him in tonight wasn't about food. There was a stillness about him, the kind that came from carrying something unspoken. When his eyes met hers again, she caught a flicker of recognition in her own mind. It was fleeting, almost impossible to believe in such an ordinary moment, but somewhere in that weary gaze, she thought she saw the face of a man whose image she'd glimpsed on countless screens. And yet, here he was, alone on a rainy night, sitting at her favorite table as if fate had guided him there. Alana returned to the counter, giving him space, though her curiosity stirred like the steam curling above the coffee pot. She wrapped the last set of silverware, stacking it neatly, but her gaze drifted back to the man by the window. His hoodie looked travel-worn, his shoes splattered with dried mud. Not the kind of attire she expected from someone with his kind of face. She thought of Malik again. Her boy would have been fascinated by this stranger, probably asking a dozen questions about where he'd been and what he'd seen. She smiled faintly at the thought, then quickly pushed it away. There would be enough questions from her son tomorrow when she had to explain that the cafe, her job, and their safety net were all gone. The man finished his coffee slowly, as though in no hurry to leave. He finally reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded bill, sliding it under the mug. Alana stepped over, ready to thank him, when his voice caught her. "Do you have anything simple to eat? Just whatever's left from the day?" It wasn't a request for a menu item, more like the plea of someone who hadn't thought about food until now. She nodded. "I can make you a grilled cheese and some tomato soup. It's not fancy, but it's warm." "That sounds perfect," he said, with the faintest curve of a smile. She moved to the kitchen, the sounds of butter hissing on the hot griddle and soup bubbling softly in the pot filling the quiet. She could feel his presence even without looking. The stillness he carried seemed to alter the air itself. When she brought the plate to his table, he thanked her quietly, then took a bite as though it was the first real meal he'd had in days. His eyes softened, and she realized this wasn't just about hunger. Some meals carried memory, and maybe, for him, this one did. She wanted to ask why he was here, what had led him into the rain on a night like this. But something in his expression told her not to pry. People walked into cafes with all sorts of stories, most of them never told. Still, when the light from the street lamp shifted across his face, the truth hit her in a sudden, almost dizzying wave. She knew exactly who he was. Keanu Reeves. And from the way his shoulders stayed tense, he wasn't here to be found. Alana moved quietly behind the counter, pretending to tidy up while her thoughts spiraled. The moment she recognized him, it was as though the air in the diner had shifted. She didn't know much about Hollywood, but she knew enough to realize that a man like Keanu Reeves didn't just wander into a neighborhood cafe without a reason. Still, she kept her distance. Her life had taught her that other people's stories were their own to tell, and she had enough weight of her own to carry. That weight had been pressing on her shoulders since the day Malik was born. She had been 21, a college sophomore, with a part-time job at a grocery store and dreams of becoming a nurse. His father, who had once promised her the world, had vanished by the time Malik was 2 weeks old, leaving nothing behind but a folded note and an empty crib on the other side of the bed. There was no family to turn to except her mother, who passed away a year later, leaving Alana to navigate motherhood alone. She'd worked 2 jobs ever since. Shifts at the cafe during the day, cleaning offices at night. On weekends, she took online classes, when she could keep her eyes open long enough to read a page. Her life revolved around Malik. Every decision filtered through the question of whether it would keep him healthy and safe. Malik's asthma had been manageable at first, but by the time he turned 5, the flare-ups had become unpredictable and sometimes terrifying. Once, She'd had to rush him to the emergency room in the middle of the night, his tiny chest heaving as he fought for breath. She'd held him through the wheezing and the tears, whispering promises that she would never let anything happen to him. His medicine cost $800 a month. Without the cafe job, she didn't know how she could possibly keep up. The math didn't work, no matter how many times she scribbled it down on scraps of paper or in the margins of her notebook. Yet every night, when Malik asked if things were okay, she smiled and said the same words, "Mommy will figure it out." She said it because she needed him to believe it, even if she wasn't sure she did. She picked up the rag again and drifted toward table 6, the one by the far window. It was her favorite, something about the way the morning light spilled across it. She had no idea it was about to become the most important table in her life. The rag moved in slow circles over the worn surface of table 6, polishing wood that had been scratched and nicked over the years by countless coffee cups, forks, and hurried hands. She remembered the regulars who used to sit here, a pair of elderly sisters who always ordered lemon pie, a construction foreman who tipped in coins, a young couple who once carved their initials in the corner when they thought no one was looking. Every table told a story, but this one felt like a chapter of her own life. She'd claimed it as hers on her breaks, sipping black coffee and reviewing notes from her night classes. Some nights she'd press her phone to her ear, listening to Malik's tiny voice as he told her about his day. She'd close her eyes, imagining herself finishing school, working in a hospital, giving him more than just survival. But dreams cost time, and time had a way of being stolen by bills, deadlines, and the endless rotation of responsibilities. Even when she'd been too exhausted to keep her eyes open, she'd push herself to keep going, because there was no one else to catch them if she stopped. Tonight, her exhaustion wasn't just physical. It was the kind that crept into the bones, whispering doubts about the future. She could handle long hours, aching feet, and skipped meals, but the thought of Malik without his medicine was a fear she couldn't push away. She'd already sold her late mother's wedding ring to cover a hospital bill last year. There was nothing left to pawn, nothing left to cut from the budget except necessities they couldn't live without. She forced herself to focus on the table, straightening the condiments and adjusting the napkin holder. The motions kept her hands busy, even as her thoughts circled the same unanswerable questions. A sudden cough from the corner caught her attention. Keanu, though she still couldn't quite bring herself to think of him as that in her head, had finished his meal and was staring out the window. His expression was unreadable, yet there was something in it that mirrored her own weariness. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met across the empty diner. No words passed between them, but it felt like recognition. Not of names or fame, but of struggle. Alana turned back to her work quickly, unaware that in a few minutes, fate would bring them both back to this table for a reason neither could have predicted. The rain outside deepened into a rhythmic drumming, a steady soundtrack to the thoughts she couldn't shake. Alana gathered a stack of plates from another booth, rinsing them in the sink before sliding them into the dishwasher. The kitchen smelled faintly of grilled onions and brewed coffee, a scent she'd grown so used to that it felt like part of her skin. When she stepped back into the dining area, she found herself drawn again to table 6. Her fingertips brushed the smooth grain of the wood, and she thought about all the times she had sat here with Malik. On rare mornings off, she would bring him to the cafe, setting a plate of pancakes in front of him while he colored in his sketchbook. Those were her favorite days. Days when time felt generous, when she could forget for a moment about due dates, overtime, and overdue notices. She wondered if he would remember those mornings when he was older, or if they would blur into the background of his childhood like wallpaper, noticed but never remarked upon. She hoped he'd remember the smell of maple syrup and the sound of rain on the glass, the way she laughed even when she was tired. But the weight pressing on her now was different. The cafe's closing wasn't just the end of a job, it was the breaking of a fragile balance she had been holding together for years. Without this paycheck, there would be a gap, not just in her wallet, but in her ability to keep the promises she made to Malik. She pictured his face when she would have to tell him. His wide brown eyes, the little furrow between his brows when he worried. He would try to be brave for her, just as she tried to be brave for him. That thought cut deeper than any bill or eviction notice ever could. She took a deep breath, forcing the heaviness down for now. She would get through tonight. She would get Malik his medicine, somehow. She'd said those words so often they had almost become a prayer. Keanu shifted in his seat, drawing her attention back. He glanced briefly at table 6, then at her, as though sensing the personal history tied to this spot. Neither of them spoke, but the silence felt charged, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Neither of them knew it yet, but this table, her table, was about to tie their stories together in a way neither could walk away from. The bell above the door had already stopped ringing, but Keanu stood just inside, brushing the rain from his hoodie. For a moment he simply looked around, as though measuring the warmth of the place against the cold weight he carried in his chest. His voice, when it came, was low and careful. "Are you still serving?" The question was polite, but beneath it was the faint hesitation of someone expecting to be turned away. Alana glanced at the clock. The sign in the window still read open, though they were only minutes from locking up. In another night, with another customer, she might have hinted that the kitchen was closing soon, but something in his tone made her pause. It wasn't entitlement. It was uncertainty. She offered him a small smile. "We're still serving. Come on in." His shoulders eased just a fraction. She led him to table 6, her table, without entirely realizing why. The rain-streaked glass beside it softened the glow from the streetlights, making the space feel more private. She pulled out a chair for him, the same way she did for her favorite regulars, and set a menu in front of him. As he sat, she noticed the way he carried himself. His frame was strong, but his posture leaned inward, as if he were holding something close to protect it. His eyes, a deep brown she'd seen in movie posters years ago, seemed fixed somewhere far beyond the diner walls. She didn't know the details of whatever had brought him here, but she recognized the shape of it, that quiet kind of loneliness that had nothing to do with being alone. "I'll get you some coffee to start," she said, already moving toward the counter. On nights like this, she sometimes made what she called her regular's brew, coffee infused with a hint of cinnamon and a touch of vanilla. It wasn't on the menu, but the regulars swore it could warm a person from the inside out. When she returned, she set the mug down gently. "This one's on the house," she said. "Something a little different." He looked up at her, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something break through the tiredness in his face. Gratitude. Not for the coffee, but for the fact that someone had thought to offer it. "Thank you," he said softly. The steam curled from the mug, carrying the scent of cinnamon into the small pocket of space between them. Keanu wrapped his hands around it, as if testing the warmth before taking a sip. The first taste seemed to slow him down. His shoulders loosened just enough to notice. "This is good," he murmured, almost to himself. Alana smiled faintly. "It's my own twist, keeps the regulars coming back." "Then I'm glad I wandered in." The words were polite, but they held a sincerity she didn't expect from a man who could have been anywhere else tonight. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The rain provided a steady rhythm against the glass. She didn't rush him. There was something about the quiet that felt necessary, like both of them were adjusting to a space that asked nothing of them except to be present. As she moved to take another order from the back booth, she caught herself glancing over at him. He didn't fidget with his phone or scan the room. He just looked out the window, lost in a thought that seemed far away and heavy. When she came back to check on him, he was still watching the street, the coffee nearly gone. "Ready to order?" she asked gently. He turned toward her with a faint smile. "What do you recommend?" It was a question she always enjoyed, because it gave her a chance to talk about the food with the same care she put into serving it. She told him about the gumbo that had been simmering since morning, about the cornbread her coworker made from scratch, about the apple pie that might be the last they ever baked here. "I'll have the gumbo," he decided, his voice steadier now, "and some cornbread." She scribbled the order and turned away, but his voice stopped her. "Thanks for not rushing me." The words carried more weight than they should have, like they weren't just about the menu. She nodded once and headed to the kitchen, though she could feel his gaze follow her for a second before he looked away again. In that simple exchange, something unspoken passed between them, the quiet understanding that sometimes kindness comes in the smallest, least expected moments. The kitchen door swung shut behind her, and Alana placed the order with Miguel, the cook who had worked at the Silver Spoon for nearly as long as she had. He gave her a curious look, one brow lifting as if to ask why she was taking a new customer so close to closing. She just shrugged and said quietly, "He looked like he needed a place to sit for a while." While the gumbo simmered in its final minutes, she poured him a fresh cup of the cinnamon coffee. When she set it down, his eyes lifted in silent thanks. She noticed that the second time his voice was warmer when he said, "You didn't have to." "Sometimes people need things they don't have to ask for," she replied. That made him pause. His gaze lingered on her, like he was measuring the truth of her words. Then he took a sip, letting the warmth fill the silence again. Ava. The gumbo arrived steaming, rich with the scent of andouille sausage and shrimp. She set the cornbread alongside it, the golden crust catching the light. For the first time since he had walked in, he seemed anchored in the present. As he ate, she busied herself with small tasks, refilling the sugar jar, wiping down the counter, but she kept catching moments of him glancing her way. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but as if he were trying to place her, to understand why she felt familiar in a world where people often treated him like a headline instead of a person. When he finished, she returned with a small plate and a thin slice of apple pie. "Dessert's on me too," she said, setting it down without waiting for him to refuse. A faint smile touched his lips, but there was something deeper behind it. "You're being very generous to a stranger." Alana shrugged lightly. "Strangers are just friends you haven't met yet." He took a forkful of pie, and for a moment there was nothing but the sound of rain against the glass. But she felt it, that subtle thread forming between them, fragile but real. She didn't know his story yet, and he didn't know hers, but both of them sensed it in their own way. This meeting wasn't random. Something about it was meant to happen. When Keanu finished the last bite of pie, Alana returned with a fresh menu, though she already had a dish in mind. "If you're still a little hungry," she said, "you should try our smothered chicken. It's my grandmother's recipe. Tender chicken in a slow-cooked gravy with mashed sweet potatoes on the side. It's the kind of meal that makes the rain feel warmer." He glanced at the menu, but it was clear her description had already decided for him. "That sounds perfect," he said. She took the order back to the kitchen, describing the plate with an almost protective fondness. It was the last night they'd serve it, and she wanted it to be remembered the way her grandmother intended, as comfort on a plate. When she brought it out a few minutes later, the rich aroma filled the small space around table 6. The chicken was smothered in thick, peppery gravy, the sweet potatoes whipped to a silky smoothness, steam rising into the soft light. Keanu picked up his fork and tried the chicken first. His eyes closed briefly as he chewed, like he was letting the flavors pull him somewhere else, somewhere quieter than the chaos he'd been carrying. "This tastes like home," he said finally. That simple line made her smile. That's what my grandma always said food should do. For the first time since he walked in, conversation came more easily. He asked if she'd grown up in New Orleans. She told him she had, though she'd moved around the city a lot after her mom passed. He listened without interruption, his focus entirely on her words. When she asked what brought him to town, he hesitated before answering. "Personal reasons," he said, his tone soft but closed enough to let her know it wasn't a story he was ready to tell. "I haven't had a home-cooked meal in a long time." Something in his voice, Not the words, but the spaces between them told her that home wasn't just about a place for him. It was about people. Maybe people he'd lost. She nodded, not pressing him further. "Well, I'm glad you chose tonight to have one." There was a brief pause, and then, almost without thinking, she added, "It's my last night here." His eyes lifted from the plate. "Last night?" She gave a small shrug. "The cafe's closing. Just the way things go, I guess." Keanu's fork paused halfway to his mouth, the steam curling up and vanishing between them. "That's tough," he said quietly, as though the words themselves carried weight. Alana kept her tone light, even as her stomach nodded. "Yeah, well, life doesn't really wait for you to be ready. I'll find something else." But she didn't say how many nights she'd lain awake wondering what something else could possibly be, or how the stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen counter seemed to grow faster than she could work. She didn't tell him about the medicine receipts in her purse, tucked between grocery lists and overdue notices. Instead, she refilled his water glass, keeping her focus on the task. "At least I can say goodbye properly to the regulars," she said, "and maybe I'll finally get a full night's sleep." His gaze lingered on her a moment longer, studying her expression like he was trying to see past the careful mask she'd put on. "You're not saying everything," he said, his tone not accusing but gently certain. Alana froze for just a second before brushing it off with a small smile. "Everyone's got their stuff. No sense in making it the main topic of dinner." He nodded, accepting her boundary, but something in his eyes told her he understood exactly what it was like to carry more than you could admit to strangers. They let the conversation drift back to lighter things. She told him about the cafe's history, how it had been in the same family for 3 generations, how the old jukebox in the corner still worked if you hid it in just the right place, how the coffee recipe was a guarded secret until her boss's grandmother slipped it to her for safekeeping. Keanu listened intently, occasionally asking a question that made her laugh. His laugh in return was quieter, almost hesitant, like someone who had forgotten how it felt to share a moment without cameras or judgment waiting just outside the door. By the time he'd finished the meal, the rain outside had softened to a mist, the glass streaked with the last trails of water. The cafe felt quieter now, more like a shelter than a business on its final night. As she cleared his plate, he said softly, "You made this night feel like something it wasn't supposed to be. I didn't expect that." Alana tilted her head slightly at his words. "And what was it supposed to be?" He considered the question for a moment, eyes lowering to the empty plate, as if the answer might be written there. "Just another night I'd rather forget," he said finally. She didn't know what kind of day or week or month he'd had, but the way he spoke made her think of someone standing on a cliff edge, staring out at something they weren't sure they wanted to face. "Well," she said gently, "I'm glad it turned out different." Miguel called from the kitchen, his voice warm but tinged with farewell. He had started cleaning the grill, the metallic scrape echoing through the small cafe. The sound made Alana's chest tighten, a reminder that soon this place would be gone, replaced by silence. Keanu glanced toward the kitchen, then back at her. "Does it bother you, closing this chapter?" She hesitated, then spoke honestly. "It's not just the job, it's stability, routine, knowing I can put food on the table for my son and keep the lights on. Without it, things get uncertain." His brow lifted slightly. "You have a son?" "Malik," she said, and the name alone softened her expression. 7 years old, smartest kid I know. He's got this way of making people feel like they matter. But he's got asthma and his medicine." She trailed off, catching herself before the words tumbled into the space between them. Uh-huh. She didn't want to sound like she was fishing for sympathy, but the truth was, every time she thought about losing this paycheck, she thought about the pill bottles on the counter and how quickly they ran out. Keanu didn't press, but there was a quiet understanding in his eyes, the kind that comes from having carried someone else's weight in your own hands. She gathered the dishes, but before she could step away, he said, For what it's worth, you've got a way of making strangers feel less like strangers. Her lips curved into a faint smile. Maybe that's my real job. When she walked back to the counter, she caught herself glancing at him over her shoulder. There was something about the way he sat there, relaxed now, like the rain and the food and the conversation had lifted something off his shoulders. And though she didn't know it yet, this quiet exchange over smothered chicken and sweet potatoes would mark the beginning of a night neither of them could have predicted. The cafe had grown even quieter. The hum of the refrigerator in the corner was the only steady sound, underscored by the faint patter of rain easing into silence. Keanu's coffee sat between them, still warm, the cinnamon scent curling up into the dim light. He glanced at her as she returned from the counter. "Tell me about Malik," he said, his voice low and deliberate. Alana's steps slowed. She'd spent years perfecting the art of talking about her son without talking about his struggles. But something about the way he asked, without prying, without expectation, made the truth stir at the edges of her resolve. She sat across from him, resting the coffee pot between her hands. "He's amazing," she began, and the faint smile that appeared on her face was unguarded. 7 years old, obsessed with space and dinosaurs, he can tell you the names of every planet's moons in order, and he insists Pluto should still be one. Keanu's eyes softened with a hint of amusement. "Sounds like a kid who sticks to his convictions." "Hell does," she said, but her voice dipped slightly. "And he's braver than he should have to be." The pause after those words stretched out until she filled it. "Malik has asthma, not the kind that's managed by an inhaler now and then. It's severe. Sometimes a simple cold can send him to the ER. His medication keeps it under control, but it's not cheap." Keanu's expression didn't shift into the pity she dreaded. Instead, it stayed steady, listening. "How much does it cost?" $800 a month, she said, her tone flat, like she'd rehearsed the number 100 times to keep it from showing how it made her stomach clench. "That's before rent, before food, before everything else." He nodded slowly, as though committing the number to memory. "And with the cafe closing," she exhaled, a quiet laugh escaping despite herself. "I don't know what I'm going to do. I've got applications out, but most jobs want you available all hours. Malik's got doctor appointments, school meetings. I can't just leave him with anyone." She traced the rim of the coffee cup with her finger, eyes fixed on the swirling liquid. "I tell him we'll be fine, but I don't have a plan. Not yet." Keanu didn't rush to fill the silence. His stillness felt different, not the empty kind, but the kind that made room for someone else's truth to exist without interruption. Alana leaned back in the booth, the weariness she had been holding at bay starting to settle in her shoulders. "I've been through hard times before," she said, "but this one feels heavier. Like the stakes are higher, and the margin for error is gone." Keanu's gaze remained fixed on her, steady and unflinching. "Because of Malik," he said quietly. She nodded. "When you're alone, you can roll with whatever comes. Eat ramen noodles for a week, pick up an extra shift, sleep 4 hours a night. But when you've got a kid depending on you, especially one whose health can turn on a dime, every choice feels like walking a tightrope." Her mind drifted back to last winter, when Malik had woken in the middle of the night wheezing so badly she could hear the strain in every breath. They had driven to the hospital through freezing rain, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, praying they would get there in time. She hadn't let him see her cry, but she had sat in the parking lot afterward with her forehead against the steering wheel, shaking from the fear that she might lose him. "People tell me I'm strong," she continued, "but they don't see the nights when I'm at the kitchen table with the bills spread out, wondering which one I can push off without the lights going out. They don't see me skipping dinner so Malik has enough." Keanu listened without flinching, as though every word mattered. There was no impatience in his expression, no shifting in his seat, just a quiet presence that felt strangely grounding. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It's been a long time since someone actually listened. Not to fix it, not to judge it, just listened. His mouth curved slightly at the corners, almost imperceptibly. Sometimes that's all someone needs, he said. A space to let the weight down for a moment. Alana looked at him for a long second, wondering why this stranger, this man she'd just met an hour ago, could make her feel like she'd stepped into that kind of space. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streetlights reflecting in shallow puddles along the curb. The world seemed to pause with them, as if the night itself understood that what was being shared here was more than casual conversation. Alana reached for the coffee pot, topping off his cup almost out of habit. "Sorry," she said with a faint laugh. "Old reflex. Keep the customers happy." Keanu shook his head slightly. "Don't apologize. It's a kindness. Those are rare." Her fingers stilled on the handle. "I guess you notice that more when you don't see it often." He didn't answer right away, but the look in his eyes told her he understood. She realized then that his earlier weariness wasn't just from travel. There was a heaviness in him too, a kind of loneliness she recognized, the kind you can't cure with company because it lives deeper than that. "You ever feel like life keeps asking for more than you've got left to give?" she asked, surprising herself. "All the time," he said simply. For a moment, neither spoke. There was a strange comfort in the shared quiet, like two people standing at opposite ends of a long road but recognizing the same scenery. Alana finally broke the silence with a small shrug. "I'll figure it out. I always do. Malik deserves that much." Keanu studied her for a long moment. "He's lucky to have you." The words landed with a weight she didn't expect. Compliments often felt hollow to her, but this one felt different, like it came from someone who saw past the surface. She swallowed the lump in her throat and focused on wiping the table's edge, more to keep her hands busy than anything else. She didn't notice that he was watching her with the same quiet intensity, as if filing away, the way she carried herself despite the storm she was in. The clock above the counter ticked past closing time. In a few minutes, she'd lock the door for the last time, step into a future she couldn't yet see, and walk the narrow line between fear and hope like she always had. She moved toward the counter to grab his check, but he stopped her with a gentle shake of his head. "No rush," he said. "Let's just sit a minute." Something in his tone made her pause. She sat back down, the hum of the refrigerator filling the space between them again. Neither of them knew it yet, but that simple choice, to stay seated for just a minute longer, would become the pivot point of both their lives. The rain had picked up again, tapping against the cafe windows in a soft, steady rhythm. Alana slid the small check onto the table, the numbers written neatly in blue ink. $14.75, she said lightly, trying to mask the pang she felt knowing it might be the last bill she handed across this counter. Keanu nodded, reaching into the inside pocket of his jacket. His movements were unhurried, but there was a quiet decisiveness about them. He pulled out his wallet and set it on the table. She expected him to hand over a 20, maybe tell her to keep the change. Instead, he drew out a neat stack of crisp bills, the edges perfectly aligned, and began counting silently. Her brows knit slightly. "Sir, that's—" He didn't answer right away. When he finished, he tucked the folded bills under the edge of the check, placing his coffee mug on top as if to keep them from sliding away. "Thank you for the meal," he said, his voice as even as it had been all night. She reached for the slip, her fingers brushing the paper, and froze. The cash felt thick, far too thick for a meal this small. She unfolded the bills and started counting without meaning to. 100, 2, 3. She kept going, her breath catching as the total climbed past 500. She looked up at him, wide-eyed, but he gave no explanation, only the faintest trace of a smile. By the time she reached the last bill, her hands were trembling. $1,000. Her heart thudded in her chest. No, this can't be right. "It's right," he said simply. She shook her head quickly, the instinct to refuse kicking in. "No, I can't take this. That's way too much for one meal. I appreciate it, but—" He lifted a hand slightly, stopping her words without raising his voice. "Alana, no one who cares for their child the way you do should have to choose between rent and medicine." Her breath caught again, this time for a different reason. Hearing Malik's situation reflected back at her, not as a pity statement, but as a truth spoken plainly, unraveled something deep inside. She tried again to hand the money back, her voice soft but firm. "I mean it. This is too much." Keanu leaned back, his eyes never leaving hers. "It's not enough. But it's what I can do tonight." Alana stood there for a moment, still holding the money as though it might vanish if she blinked. "I can't accept this," she whispered again. But her voice lacked conviction now. Keanu's gaze was steady, almost gentle. "You already have. You served me when you didn't have to. You listened without judgment. You made me feel human again?" Her lips parted slightly, caught off guard by the last part. "Human again? You make it sound like I've been walking around invisible," he finished for her. "Or like people only see a version of me that's not real." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment she forgot about the money entirely. She recognized that feeling all too well, the sense that people only see what they expect to see. The bills were still in her hand, warm now from her grip. She looked down at them, then back at him. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he replied. "Use it for Malik, for his medicine. Or maybe something that makes him smile." Her throat tightened at the mention of her son's name. This man she'd known for less than an hour had managed to see through every layer she kept up for the world. Outside, the rain was coming down harder, streaking the glass with rivulets that distorted the glow of the streetlights. She became aware of the clock on the wall, the soft hum of the fridge, the way the air felt thick with something unspoken. She tried to memorize his face in that moment. Not the one plastered on movie posters, but the one sitting across from her now, unguarded, tired but kind. He stood then, pushing back his chair quietly. She wanted to ask his name, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the fear of breaking the strange, delicate thread that had formed between them. Instead, she managed only, "Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure," he said, slipping his hood up over his head. "Take care of him, Alana." The way he said it made it sound like a promise, one he was trusting her to keep. She nodded slowly, unable to find words that wouldn't crack her voice. He gave her one last faint smile before stepping away from the table, heading toward the door. The bell above the door gave a soft chime as Keanu stepped outside. A rush of cool, damp air swept into the cafe, carrying the earthy scent of rain. Alana followed him to the threshold, still gripping the stack of bills as though afraid the moment might dissolve if she let go. The street outside glistened, puddles reflecting the fractured neon glow from the diner's sign. Keanu paused under the awning, tugging his hood a little lower. For a brief second, he glanced back, their eyes meeting through the doorway. There was no dramatic farewell, no grand speech, only a quiet nod that felt heavier than words. And then he stepped into the rain. She stood there watching, the sound of his footsteps swallowed by the steady downpour. He didn't rush toward a waiting car or duck into an alley. He simply walked, his figure growing smaller against the slick, dark pavement until the mist swallowed him whole. Alana let the door ease shut, the latch clicking softly. The cafe felt impossibly still now, as though it too were absorbing what had just happened. She looked down at the bills again, the edges already beginning to curl from the dampness of her hands. $1,000. Enough to cover Malik's medicine for more than a month. Enough to keep the lights on and buy him that birthday cake she'd been quietly telling herself they could skip this year. Her breath caught, and without warning, her eyes burned. She pressed a hand against her mouth, willing herself not to cry, not here, not now. But the tears came anyway, hot, unsteady, and unstoppable. It wasn't just the money. It was the way he'd looked at her when he said those words. The way he had understood, without her having to explain, how heavy the burden was. She wiped her eyes and glanced toward table 6. His coffee mug still sat there, half empty, a faint trace of cinnamon clinging to the rim. The folded check was pinned beneath the salt shaker, as if holding on to the memory of what had just unfolded. For a long time, she didn't move. The rain kept falling outside, the world carrying on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But she knew better. This night, this stranger, this gift, it had shifted something inside her. And though she didn't yet know how, she was certain it wasn't the last she'd see of him. By the time Alana made it home, the rain had softened to a drizzle, leaving the streets of her neighborhood slick and shimmering under the glow of dim street lamps. She clutched her purse close, feeling the weight of the envelope inside, like it was a fragile piece of magic that might vanish if she loosened her grip. Mrs. Green opened the apartment door before Alana could knock, her petite frame framed by the warm light spilling from the living room. "You're late, baby. I was starting to worry," she said, her voice carrying that mix of sternness and affection only someone who had known you for years could manage. Alana stepped inside, shaking off her damp jacket. Malik was asleep on the couch, his chest rising and falling in slow, even breaths. The sight of him so peaceful always softened the knots in her chest. She reached down to brush a hand over his curls before looking back at Mrs. Green. "You're never going to believe what happened tonight," Alana whispered, not wanting to wake Malik. Mrs. Green raised an eyebrow. "Judging by the look on your face, it's either something wonderful or something you're not sure you can handle." Alana sank into the worn armchair, still holding her purse. "A man came into the cafe, late, just before closing. I thought it was just another customer, but after he ate, he left a tip. $1,000. Mrs. Green's eyes widened. "1,000? Are you sure?" Alana nodded and opened the purse, pulling out the crisp bills and setting them on the coffee table. The older woman leaned forward, touching them like they might evaporate under her fingertips. "My goodness," she murmured, "and he just gave this to you? No strings, no explanation?" Alana hesitated. "He said something, that no one who loves their child the way I do should have to choose between rent and medicine. Then he was gone before I could even get his name." Mrs. Green studied her for a long moment, her eyes narrowing in thought. "Sounds like a blessing, Alana. But I know you. You're wondering why it happened to you." Alana looked down at her hands. "Exactly. I mean, why me? There are so many people out there struggling. What if this was a mistake? Baby, blessings don't come with warning labels. Sometimes they just fall into your lap because the good Lord sees you've been carrying too much for too long," Mrs. Green said softly. Alana exhaled slowly, unsure if she believed that yet, but wanting to. Tonight had been strange, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. The next morning, the sky was a pale, washed-out blue, the kind that carried no promise of sun but hinted at a calmer day ahead. Alana woke earlier than usual, her mind restless. The envelope lay on the nightstand, exactly where she had placed it after Mrs. Green left the night before. She stared at it for a long time before reaching for it, almost expecting the bills to have turned into scraps of paper overnight. They were still there, crisp, real, heavy with possibility. She dressed quietly, careful not to wake Malik, and made a quick breakfast before bundling him up for school. His laughter over a silly joke she made eased some of the tension in her chest. But she couldn't shake the surreal feeling from the night before. After walking him to school, she headed straight for the bank. The sterile air inside smelled faintly of disinfectant, the tiled floor gleaming under the fluorescent lights. She approached the counter, her fingers gripping the envelope tightly. The teller, a young man with a friendly smile, greeted her. "How can I help you today?" I need to deposit this," she said, sliding the envelope forward. When he opened it, his brows lifted slightly, but he remained professional. "All cash?" "Yes," Alana said, her voice steady despite the pounding in her ears. He counted it twice, then typed into the computer. "All right, it's all set. Your new balance reflects the deposit." Alana glanced at the receipt. The numbers looked unreal to her. She couldn't remember the last time she had that much money in her account. Relief washed over her, but it was tangled with disbelief. On her way out, she stopped at the pharmacy. The pharmacist, who knew her by name from the many late-night visits for Malik's inhalers, smiled warmly. "Alana, you're early this month." She handed over the prescription and paid without flinching at the total. For once, she didn't have to mentally calculate what bills would have to wait. As she placed the small bag of medicine in her tote, a wave of gratitude swelled in her chest. It wasn't just about the money. It was about breathing room, about Malik having what he needed without her heart racing every time she looked at their budget. Still, as she walked back toward home, her thoughts kept circling the same question. Who was that man really? And why did it feel like he had walked into her life for a reason she hadn't yet uncovered? By the time Alana returned to her apartment, the morning had settled into a strange stillness. Mrs. Green was sitting on her usual spot by the window, a knitting project in her lap. She looked up with a knowing smile when Alana stepped inside. "Judging by that look, you went to the bank," Mrs. Green said softly. Alana sank into the chair across from her, letting out a slow breath. "It's real, every dollar. I already bought Malik's medicine for the month." Mrs. Green's hand stilled on her knitting needles. "Then maybe it's not for you to question. Maybe it's just your turn for some kindness." Alana leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a moment. "But why me? There are so many people who need help. What if I don't deserve it? What if it was meant for someone else?" Mrs. Green chuckled, the sound warm and gentle. "Child, blessings don't get lost in the mail. If it landed in your hands, it was meant for you. Don't waste the gift worrying about where it came from." Those words stayed with her long after Mrs. Green returned to her knitting. Later that afternoon, Malik came home from school full of energy. He bounded into the living room, proudly holding a drawing of a tree with sprawling roots and bright red apples. "This is us," he explained. "The tree is you, and I'm the little bird living in the branches." The picture nearly undid her. She pulled him close, breathing in the familiar scent of his hair, the warmth of his small body. "That's beautiful, baby," she whispered. For the first time in months, Alana felt a glimmer of something she hadn't dared to feel. Hope. It wasn't a full flame yet, but it was there, flickering steady. That night, after Malik was asleep, she sat at the small kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring out at the rain-slick streets below. Somewhere out there was the man who had walked into her life and changed it in a single evening. She didn't know if she would ever see him again, but she knew this much. Whatever his reasons, his act had pulled her back from the edge. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, life had a way of sending people exactly when you needed them most. The following morning began like any other. Alana was rinsing breakfast dishes when her phone, sitting on the counter, buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She almost ignored it, assuming it was another telemarketer, but something made her swipe to answer. "Hello, is this Ms. Alana Brooks?" a calm professional voice asked. "Yes, this is she." "This is Danielle Morris calling from the Crescent Foundation for Families," the woman continued. "We're a nonprofit dedicated to supporting parents with children who have chronic health conditions." Alana's brow furrowed. "I think you might have the wrong number. I never applied for anything." Danielle's tone softened. "Actually, you've been nominated by someone who has seen your dedication to your son. We'd like to cover Malik's medical expenses for the next 12 months. That includes his prescriptions, checkups, and any specialist visits." The words hit Alana like a wave, leaving her momentarily speechless. I don't understand. Who would nominate me? I'm afraid I can't share the name, Danielle replied gently. The referral was confidential, but I can tell you they spoke about you with great respect. They said you're a mother who fights for her child, no matter the cost, and that your perseverance deserves support. Alana gripped the edge of the counter, her mind racing. The foundation, the nomination, the kindness in the caller's voice. It was too specific to be random. I still don't know what to say, she murmured, her voice trembling. All you need to say is yes, Danielle said. If you agree, we can have the paperwork to you by this afternoon, and Malik's coverage will begin immediately. Alana hesitated. She had learned to be cautious when life suddenly offered something that seemed too good to be true. There's no catch? No catch, just help freely given, Danielle assured her. Sometimes the right ears hear the right story, and good things happen. As the call ended, Alana set the phone down slowly, staring at the sunlight spilling through the kitchen blinds. Her heart pounded in her chest. It had to be him. The man in the hoodie. The quiet stranger with the tired eyes. The one who left $1,000 tip and walked out into the rain without a name. Her fingers hovered over the phone again, as if she could call him just by wishing hard enough. But she didn't even know where to start. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Alana tried to focus on small chores, folding laundry, sweeping the hallway, checking Malik's inhalers, but her mind kept circling back to the call. Malik noticed her distracted energy. "Mom, are you okay? You're smiling weird." She laughed softly, kneeling beside him. "I just got some good news. It means you're going to have all the medicine you need for a whole year, and we won't have to worry about running out." His eyes widened in innocent relief. "So no more skipping doses when it's almost gone?" Her throat tightened. "No more skipping doses, baby. I promise." Mrs. Green stopped by later that afternoon bringing a plate of cornbread. When Alana shared the news, the elderly woman clasped her hands together. "Lord works in mysterious ways. You keep telling me not to worry, but see, blessings come to those who keep their head up." Alana nodded, though her thoughts were far from calm. She could hear the rain from 2 nights ago in her mind, could see the way the stranger's gaze lingered, as if he understood burdens no one else could see. It wasn't the tip alone that had stuck with her. It was the words he'd left her with. No one who cares for their child the way you do should have to choose between rent and medicine. That kind of sentence wasn't casual. It was deliberate. It came from someone who knew what it meant to give without expecting something in return. She pulled out her phone and began searching for the Crescent Foundation for Families. Their website was simple, clean blue and white with pictures of smiling parents and children. The list of donors was long, but anonymous contributions were marked only as private benefactor. She clicked through press releases, scrolling faster each time, hoping for some clue. But there was nothing. Whoever had done this wanted to remain hidden. Her heart wrestled between gratitude and the ache of not knowing. Gratitude because Malik's health was finally secure for the year ahead. Ache because she wanted to thank him. If it was him, and not just in words. She wanted to look him in the eye and let him see the difference he'd made. And somewhere in that feeling was a quiet resolve. If fate had brought him to table 6, maybe fate wasn't done yet. That evening, Alana sat by the kitchen window, the warm glow of the lamp casting a soft halo over her journal. She hadn't written in weeks. There had been no time and even less emotional energy, but tonight felt different. She opened to a blank page and began writing down everything she remembered about the man in the dark hoodie, the quiet way he entered, the weight in his eyes, the politeness in his tone, the faint trace of humility that didn't match the confidence of most strangers who wandered in just before closing. She wrote about his choice of meal, the way he savored each bite, and how he had actually listened to her instead of just nodding out of politeness. And then, the part that still made her chest tighten, the folded bills left under the edge of the check, and the way he slipped out, into the rain, before she could even ask his name. She didn't know why she was writing it all down. Maybe to preserve the memory. Maybe to remind herself in the hard days ahead that miracles could still slip quietly into ordinary lives. Malik peeked around the corner, his pajama hood pulled up over his head. "Mom, can we watch the rain before bed?" She smiled and followed him to the living room window. The street outside glistened from a fresh drizzle, and the air smelled faintly of wet pavement. Malik pressed his forehead to the glass. "It feels like something good is going to happen." His words settled into her heart like a quiet truth. Something had already happened. Something rare and life-changing. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't over yet. Before bed, she checked the foundation's email again, rereading the confirmation that Malik's medical costs were fully covered for 12 months. She traced the sentence with her fingertip, imagining the chain of events that must have led to this moment. Somewhere out there, someone had seen her, not just the tired waitress at the end of a long shift, but the mother who refused to give up. As she turned off the light, she made herself a promise. If she ever found him again, she wouldn't let him slip away without knowing the truth, that his kindness had not just helped her survive, but had restored her belief that people could still change the course of a life in a single act. And in that quiet darkness, she whispered a thank you to the rain. 2 days after the call from the Crescent Foundation, Alana was folding laundry at the kitchen table when her phone buzzed again. The number was local but unfamiliar. She almost let it go to voicemail. Bills and telemarketers had made her wary. But something nudged her to answer. The voice on the other end was warm and confident. "Ms. Brooks? My name is Dana Walsh. I'm the Director of Family Services at Crescent Children's Hospital. The foundation gave me your contact information and mentioned your remarkable dedication to your son." Alana straightened in her chair, unsure where this was going. "Yes, that's me. I wanted to ask if you might be open to something new," Dana continued. "We have an opening for a family liaison here at the hospital. It's a role that works directly with parents of children who are navigating serious or chronic illnesses. We help them access resources, understand medical plans, and find emotional support." Alana blinked, surprised. "I don't have any experience in healthcare." "That's actually why I called," Dana said. "We've found that lived experience, especially from parents who have been through this, is sometimes the most valuable qualification. You've already learned how to advocate for your son, manage the system, and keep hope alive in difficult circumstances. Those skills can't be taught in a classroom." The presupposition, graphic accuracy, it may seem simple. 2016, massive suicides, not echo. The idea felt impossible, and yet strangely right. Alana pictured the countless hours she'd spent in waiting rooms, on the phone with insurance companies, and researching treatment options late into the night. She knew the exhaustion, the fear, and the loneliness of being a parent in those situations. But she also knew the relief that came from someone, anyone, pointing her toward help. "What exactly would the job involve?" she asked cautiously. "You'd meet families, listen to their needs, connect them to resources, and walk with them through the process. Sometimes that means practical paperwork. Sometimes it's just sitting with them while they cry. It's not easy work, but it's deeply meaningful." Alana stared at the laundry pile in front of her. The cafe was gone. The tip money had bought Malik's medicine for a month. The foundation had given her breathing room. And now this. A door opening into a place she never imagined she could belong. Her heart thudded as Dana's voice softened. "I think you'd be perfect for it." Alana spent the rest of that afternoon pacing her small apartment. She kept replaying the conversation in her mind, torn between disbelief and a cautious hope. The thought of stepping into a hospital every day was daunting. She had seen enough of those sterile hallways during Malik's early years to associate them with worry, not opportunity. Yet the idea of being the person she had once needed, someone who could translate medical jargon, guide lost parents, and hold space for their fears, pulled at her. She remembered the nights when Malik was just a baby, coughing so hard she thought he might stop breathing, and how desperately she had searched for answers in the faces of overworked nurses. When Dana called back that evening to follow up, Alana asked for the weekend to think it over. Malik was already tucked in bed, breathing softly through his inhaler's routine treatment, when she sat by his side and whispered, "Would you like Mommy to have a new job? One where I could help other kids like you?" Malik's sleepy eyes lit up. "You'd be like a superhero for moms," he murmured before drifting off again. The words lodged in her chest like a warm ember. She thought of the cafe's closing night, of the man in the dark hoodie who had walked in out of the rain, and how his quiet generosity had not just filled her wallet, but had started to fill her life with possibilities again. It felt as though his presence had set something in motion, a chain of events that kept leading her forward. The next morning, she called Dana back. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I've never done anything like this before, but I want to try." Dana's tone brightened. "That's all I needed to hear. We'll train you, and we'll walk with you every step of the way. You already have what matters most." They arranged for her to start the following Monday. The hospital was a bus ride and a short walk from her apartment, closer than the cafe had been. The thought of a steady paycheck and work that mattered began to quiet the old fears that had been her constant companions. That night, for the first time in months, Alana slept without waking in the middle of the night to worry about the future. Monday came with a pale sunrise breaking through thin clouds. Alana dressed carefully in her best blouse and pressed slacks, her hands trembling slightly as she buttoned her cuffs. Malik sat at the small kitchen table, eating his cereal, his eyes wide with pride. "You're going to help a lot of people," he said, as if it were the most certain truth in the world. The walk from the bus stop to the hospital was lined with oak trees, their branches heavy with green leaves. She paused for a moment outside the glass entrance, catching her reflection. For years she had been defined by survival, the long shifts, the constant calculations of what bill could be delayed, the quiet resilience she carried. Today, she wanted to believe she was stepping into something more. Inside, Dana greeted her with a warm hug, then led her through a maze of hallways. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, but there was also the comforting scent of coffee brewing somewhere nearby. They passed by playrooms filled with bright murals, laughter echoing from behind closed doors. In the small office that would be hers, there was a desk with a vase of fresh flowers, lilies, their scent delicate and unexpected. A card tucked beside them simply read, "For your first day, you belong here." There was no signature, but Alana didn't need one. She knew in her heart who it was from. The day was a blur of introductions. Nurses, social workers, and doctors stopped by to shake her hand. She listened as they explained the challenges families faced, insurance paperwork, complicated treatment plans, and the emotional toll of a child's illness. Every story felt familiar in some way. By the time she left that evening, the sun was setting in gold streaks over the city skyline. Her feet were sore, her head full, but her heart felt steady. She had been given a chance to stand on the other side of the struggle, to turn her years of hardship into a compass for others. As she stepped onto the bus home, she glanced at the sky and whispered a silent thank you to the stranger who had started it all, and to the path that was just beginning to unfold. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the children's hospital as Alana settled into her office chair, a fresh cup of cinnamon coffee steaming beside her. It had been a month since she started her new role, and already her days were filled with moments that reminded her why she was here. That day, Donna stopped by her door and asked if she could meet with a father in the waiting room. His son, only 8 years old, had been diagnosed with sickle cell anemia. The father, Mr. Harris, sat hunched forward in a plastic chair, his hands clasped tightly as if holding on to something invisible. His eyes were wary, tired, the look of someone who had been carrying more than his share of burdens. Alana sat beside him, her voice soft but steady. "I'm here to help you navigate what comes next," she said. He hesitated, then began speaking in slow, halting words about the endless appointments, the bills piling up, and the confusion over treatment plans. She listened without rushing him, remembering her own sleepless nights in cramped waiting rooms, clutching Malik's inhaler. She pulled out brochures and forms, explaining each option in plain language, circling the programs that could help with medication costs and travel stipends. She didn't just tell him what to do, she made sure he understood why each step mattered. By the time their conversation ended, Mr. Harris's shoulders had eased, and there was the faintest glimmer of relief in his eyes. "I didn't think anyone would have the patience to sit and explain it," he admitted. Alana smiled. "I know what it's like to feel lost. You're not alone in this." Walking back to her desk, she realized something important. Her strength didn't come from a degree on the wall or years of clinical training. It came from the years she had spent navigating her own storms. That, she thought, was her real qualification. Later that evening, she picked Malik up from school and saw him running across the field, laughing with his friends, his movements quick and free. For a moment, her throat tightened. Just months ago, even a short game of tag would leave him doubled over, coughing. Now his lungs were strong enough for soccer. The foundation's support had done more than keep him healthy. It had given him a childhood back. The next week, Alana found herself in the pediatric infusion room, sitting beside a young mother named Kiara, whose daughter was beginning a new round of treatment. The beeping of machines and the sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air, but Alana's presence seemed to soften the edges of the moment. Kiara's eyes darted between the IV drip and the nurses moving in and out of the room. Her voice trembled when she admitted she hadn't told her daughter exactly what was happening. "I don't want her to be afraid," she whispered. Alana leaned in, lowering her voice so only Kiara could hear. "It's okay to protect her, but it's also okay to let her see that you're human. You don't have to be perfect. Just present." It was something she had learned through Malik's long nights with fever and wheezing. There had been times she'd hidden in the bathroom just to cry, then wiped her face and gone back out to smile. But she'd also learned that letting him see a tear or two didn't weaken him. It made him trust her more. They sat together for over an hour, talking about insurance paperwork, school accommodations, and the strange way hospitals made time feel both slow and urgent. By the end, Kiara wasn't gripping her bag as tightly. She thanked Alana not just for the information, but for making the room feel less cold. Back at her desk, Alana jotted notes in her follow-up file, making sure to highlight the programs that could give Kiara's family a financial cushion. She had come to understand that every conversation was more than a task. It was a lifeline. That evening, Malik bounded into their small apartment, proudly waving a flyer for the school soccer team. "They said I can try out next week," he announced, cheeks flushed from excitement. Alana knelt to hug him, holding him longer than necessary. His breath was steady against her shoulder, a quiet rhythm that spoke of health restored. She thought about how different this moment could have been if not for that rainy night at the cafe, if not for the stranger whose kindness had shifted the course of their lives. In the quiet that followed dinner, she found herself looking at the soccer flyer on the fridge. Malik's dreams were growing, and for the first time in years, hers were too. Saturday mornings used to be Alana's catch-up time, laundry, budgeting, and worrying about what bills could wait. Now, they had become something brighter. She and Malik walked to the park with a ball tucked under his arm, the spring air carrying the sound of other children, laughing and playing. She noticed the way he ran now, feet pounding the grass with no hesitation, no pauses to catch his breath. A few months ago, even a short sprint left him doubled over, coughing until tears welled in his eyes. Today, he chased the ball with the easy freedom of a boy who could finally keep up. On the sidelines, a father she had helped at the hospital recognized her and waved. His son had recently been discharged, and they exchanged a few words about progress and checkups. She realized how much these connections meant to her. They weren't just casual acquaintances. They were threads in a growing tapestry of resilience and hope. When Malik scored his first practice goal, he looked over at her with that wide, toothy grin she hadn't seen in years. She clapped so hard her hands stung, feeling a swell of gratitude that pushed against her ribs. That night, after Malik was asleep, she sat by the window, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. She thought about the stranger with the kind eyes, the $1,000 0 cents tip, and the quiet way he had disappeared into the rain. She still didn't know his name for certain, but his presence lingered in the shape of every opportunity that had followed. Her work at the children's hospital had given her more than a paycheck. It had given her purpose, a reason to get up every morning and walk into a place where her story could be someone else's hope. She understood now that helping families wasn't about having all the answers. It was about showing up, listening, and reminding them they weren't alone. In the distance, a siren wailed briefly, then faded. She sipped her tea and whispered a silent thank you into the night. Somewhere out there, the man who had changed everything might be walking under the same moonlight. And though she didn't know if they would ever meet again, she carried his kindness forward, certain that the best way to honor it was to pass it on. It began with a small request. One afternoon at the children's hospital, a young mother asked Alana where she could apply for rent assistance. Alana walked her through the forms and told her which office processed them fastest. The gratitude in the woman's eyes stayed with her for days. A week later, another parent approached her in the hallway. This time, it was about finding a transportation program for medical appointments. Again, Alana knew exactly who to call. Word spread quietly, and soon, parents who weren't even connected to her patients were seeking her advice. That was when she decided to start volunteering at the community center 2 evenings a week. The center's cramped office had a second-hand desk, a squeaky chair, and a file cabinet that groaned every time it opened. But it also had people who needed someone willing to listen. At first, she simply answered questions: which forms to fill out, what to say when applying for emergency childcare. But soon she began organizing informal workshops. They were small gatherings, often with kids coloring in the corner while their parents took notes. She called the sessions resource nights, and they quickly became a staple. Single parents told her that for the first time in months, they felt like the system wasn't impossible to navigate. One father admitted that he had been considering giving up his custody rights because he couldn't manage his daughter's medical needs alone. After Alana connected him with a grant program, he came back weeks later with tears in his eyes, saying he could finally keep his little girl with him. The local newspaper caught wind of her work and published a short piece titled "A Guardian Angel for Families in Crisis." The nickname stuck. At the grocery store, people would stop her just to shake her hand or say thank you. At first, the attention embarrassed her. She didn't see herself as a savior. She was just passing on the help she had once needed so desperately. But the recognition also stirred something in her. If this much could be done from a small corner of a community center, what might be possible if there was a dedicated space? A place with staff, funding, and programs tailored for parents who had nowhere else to turn. The idea took root in her mind, quiet but insistent, like the first green sprout after a long winter. The more Alana thought about it, the more the vision began to take shape. She imagined a bright, welcoming building filled with resources, shelves stacked with donated children's clothes, a pantry stocked with healthy food, and rooms where parents could sit with caseworkers who actually listened. In her mind, there was even a play area so kids could feel safe while their parents handled paperwork. One night after a workshop, she lingered at the community center long after the last parent had gone. The old fluorescent lights hummed above her as she flipped through the sign-in sheets. Each name told a story. Some she knew in detail, others only in glimpses. There was Jenna, who worked 2 jobs while caring for a son with cerebral palsy. Luis, who had lost his wife and was raising 3 children alone, and Tasha, who had been sleeping in her car while saving up for a security deposit. Alana ran her fingers over the worn edges of the papers and felt a familiar ache. She had been where they were, scared, exhausted, unsure how to keep going. The difference was that someone somewhere had decided she was worth helping. That stranger in the rain had given her more than money. He had given her stability, dignity, and hope. She began keeping a notebook of ideas. At first, it was just a list of programs that could make life easier for parents. Then it grew into sketches of room layouts, potential schedules for staff, and names of possible donors. She didn't share it with anyone, not yet. The dream felt too fragile to expose before it was ready. Still, the work she was already doing was changing her in ways she hadn't expected. She found herself speaking up in meetings, suggesting new ways to streamline hospital resource referrals. She became known for her persistence. If a program rejected one of her families, she would keep calling until she found another solution. And always, in the quiet moments between helping others, her mind returned to the thought, there needs to be a place just for this. A place where no parent has to feel the isolation she once felt. A place that could stand as proof that help is not a privilege, but a right for those doing everything they can for their children. Word of her dedication began to spread beyond the walls of the community center. Local churches reached out, asking her to speak at gatherings for single parents. A neighborhood bakery offered to host a small fundraiser after hearing about her work. Even the local newspaper ran a short piece calling her a beacon for struggling families. Alana accepted each invitation with humility, always careful to make the focus about the families rather than herself. She knew the dangers of attention, how quickly it could shift from sincere interest to shallow praise. But she also recognized the power of visibility. If telling her story could connect a parent to help they didn't know existed, it was worth stepping into the spotlight for a moment. At home, Malik would listen as she recounted the day's events over dinner. His eyes would light up when she spoke about the kids she'd met. "So you're kind of like a superhero?" he teased one evening, grinning as he passed her the bread basket. She laughed, shaking her head. "No, I'm just someone who remembers what it feels like to be scared, and I don't want anyone else to feel that way if I can help it." That night, after Malik had gone to bed, Alana sat by the window with her notebook. The rain outside reminded her of the night everything had changed. She wrote one sentence at the top of a fresh page. "Start where you are, with what you have." It became her quiet mantra. From that point forward, the idea of creating a dedicated center stopped feeling like a distant dream and started feeling like an inevitable next step. She began asking subtle questions in her network about available spaces, grant programs, and potential partnerships. The pieces were scattered, but she could see how they might come together. And in the back of her mind, she still wondered about him, the stranger who had set her life on a new course without asking for anything in return. She didn't know if she would ever see him again, but she hoped he might somehow hear about the work being done, about the lives being changed. If he did, she wanted him to know his act of kindness hadn't ended at that cafe table. It had multiplied, rippling outward into places neither of them could have imagined. The letter arrived in a plain white envelope with no return address, tucked between utility bills and grocery coupons. Alana almost tossed it aside until she noticed the gold-embossed seal at the top. Inside was a formal invitation on thick card stock, informing her that she had been nominated for the New Orleans Community Hero Award. She read the words twice, hardly believing them. The nomination came from multiple independent recommendations, though no names were listed. Her first thought was that there must have been some mistake. She wasn't a hero. She was just doing what anyone in her position would do, or at least what she hoped they would. But as she read on, the reality settled in. The ceremony would be held at the historic Orpheum Theater, a place she'd only ever passed by on her way to work. The dress code was formal, which made her chuckle nervously. She couldn't remember the last time she'd worn anything fancier than a clean blouse and slacks. And the damnedest the bad was, she wouldn't remember the last time she'd worn anything fancier than a clean blouse and slacks. When she told Malik, his reaction erased any doubts she'd had about attending. He clapped his hands together and grinned. "Mom, you have to go. You're going to win, I just know it." She ruffled his hair, smiling despite her nerves. "It's not about winning. It's about recognizing all the people who are trying to make this city better." But inside, she couldn't deny how much his pride warmed her heart. The night of the event came quicker than she expected. She wore a deep blue dress borrowed from Mrs. Green's granddaughter, its hem just brushing the tops of her heels. Malik wore a little charcoal gray suit with a matching blue tie, looking every bit the proud young man. As they walked up the steps of the Orpheum, he held her hand tightly, his eyes wide at the sight of the glowing marquee. Inside, the theater was transformed into a glittering hall. Soft golden light bathed the high ceilings, and rows of white-clothed tables were arranged in a semicircle around a low stage. Servers in crisp uniforms moved quietly between guests, refilling glasses and setting down plates of food. Alana tried to take it all in without feeling overwhelmed. She had no idea that, at the far back of the room, someone was already watching her with quiet satisfaction, blending into the crowd as if he had always belonged there. The program began with a short video montage of past winners: firefighters, teachers, volunteers who had rebuilt neighborhoods after hurricanes. Alana felt a lump rise in her throat as she realized she was now sitting among those same kinds of people. Malik leaned toward her, whispering, "That's going to be you up there next year's video." She gave his hand a gentle squeeze, partly to steady herself. As the master of ceremonies called each nominee's name, polite applause filled the room. Some nominees stood and waved, others simply nodded. When her name was read, Malik clapped so enthusiastically that people at nearby tables turned to smile at him. Alana felt her cheeks warm, but she stood, offering a modest nod before sitting back down. The speeches were heartfelt, each honoree sharing a story about why they started their work. Alana listened closely, feeling connected to every person who spoke. She didn't know if she would be asked to say anything herself, but she began mentally composing something honest. Halfway through the evening, as dessert was being served, she excused herself to the lobby to take a breath. The size of the event, the attention, it was all so different from her day-to-day life. Standing near a display of framed photos from past ceremonies, she felt the cool marble under her fingertips and let out a slow exhale. When she returned to her table, she noticed someone standing at the far back of the theater, away from the crowd, his posture easy yet watchful. He was dressed in a simple black suit, nothing flashy, and his dark hair was brushed back in a familiar way. It took her a moment to place the face in the dim light, but when he shifted slightly, she knew. The employee, Reeves. He didn't approach. He didn't wave or make himself known to anyone else. He just stood there, his gaze steady, as if he were quietly making sure she was all right. A strange mix of gratitude and disbelief swelled inside her. She wanted to go over, to thank him for everything, but before she could decide how to do it without drawing attention, the MC announced the next segment of the program. By the time she glanced back toward the rear of the theater, he was gone. The rest of the ceremony passed in a warm blur. Speeches about service, resilience, and love for community filled the air. Alana's name was called once more, this time as one of the 3 finalists. Malik's small hand gripped hers tighter, his eyes wide with excitement. She walked to the stage. When her turn came, the lights bright, the crowd hushed. The award in her category went to a man who had rescued dozens during a flood, but Alana felt no sting of disappointment. Standing under the spotlight, she was asked to say a few words as a finalist. She cleared her throat, heart pounding, and spoke from the only place that felt right. The truth. "I'm just a mom," she began. "I never thought I'd be standing here. All I've done is love my son, and try to make life a little easier for families like ours. If you're sitting here tonight thinking you're too small to make a difference, please believe me, you're not. Her voice wavered, but she saw Malik smiling in the front row, and it steadied her. The applause rose gently, like a tide, and as she stepped down from the stage, several strangers reached out to shake her hand. She returned to her table feeling lighter, more certain that she was where she was meant to be. Later, as the event came to a close, Malik tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, did you see the man at the back earlier?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, wondering how to explain without making it sound like a dream. "Yes," she said finally. "I think I did." They walked out into the cool night air together. The street outside the hall was quiet, the city's hum softened by the distance from the main roads. Alana glanced up and down the sidewalk, half expecting to see him leaning against a street lamp or stepping into a waiting car. But there was no sign of him. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and looked down at Malik. "Some people do their best work without ever stepping into the light," she murmured. Malik tilted his head, but didn't press for more. They walked on, the sound of their footsteps blending with the faint echo of applause still ringing in her ears. The next morning, Alana sat at her small kitchen table, Malik still asleep in the bedroom, the smell of fresh coffee filling the air. She kept replaying the moments from the night before, the way her hands trembled when she spoke, the warmth of the audience, and the flicker of a familiar face in the shadows at the back of the hall. By midday, she was back at the community center for a scheduled meeting. A local radio station had asked her to record a short segment about her work. They wanted her to tell her story in her own words, not just as an award finalist, but as a mother who had turned hardship into hope. When the microphone was placed in front of her, Alana took a deep breath and began. She spoke of long nights worrying about Malik's health, of the days she skipped meals so he could have what he needed, and of the strangers who had stepped in when she had nothing left to give. "I wouldn't be here today without one act of kindness," she said, her voice softening. "A stranger who didn't know me, didn't owe me anything, chose to see me, really see me. And in doing so, he gave me more than money. He gave me a chance to believe in good again." She didn't give a name. She didn't even hint at who it was. It felt right to keep that mystery alive, to honor the way it had all begun. Quietly, without expectation. After the segment wrapped, the station manager thanked her and offered her a ride home, but Alana wanted to walk. The air was crisp, and the short distance to her apartment gave her time to think. She had no way of knowing that the man whose kindness she had spoken about was closer than she imagined. When she turned the corner near her street, a figure stepped out from the doorway of a small cafe. He was in a black coat, hands tucked into his pockets, his familiar calmness radiating even in the busy afternoon. "Alana," he said with a small smile, and in that single word she knew. The stranger from the cafe, the man who had left $1,000 tip, was standing in front of her again. For a moment, Alana could only stare, the sounds of the street fading around her. The cars passing by, the chatter from a nearby bus stop, even the distant barking of a dog seemed to dissolve into silence. "It was you," she finally whispered, her voice catching. Keanu's smile was gentle but almost shy. "I didn't mean to intrude on your life again," he said, his tone calm. I heard what you've been doing. I wanted to be there last night, even if you didn't know." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "Why?" she asked. "Why me?" He looked at her with the same quiet steadiness she remembered from that night at the cafe. "Because I saw a mother who would do anything for her child. And I know what it's like to feel like you're fighting the world with nothing but your own hands. That day, you reminded me of something important, that the smallest kindness can change everything." Alana's throat tightened. She thought back to his words in the cafe about not having to choose between rent and medicine. Back then, she had wondered if he was just being polite. Now she realized He had been speaking from a place of deep understanding. "I didn't just leave a tip," Keanu continued. "I contacted the Crescent Foundation the next day. I asked them to take care of Malik's medical needs and to find a way to help you build a new life. But I wanted it to happen without my name attached. I didn't want you to feel like you owed me anything." She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to steady herself. "You didn't just help me. You gave Malik his childhood back. You gave me my hope back." Keanu's expression softened further. "You did the rest. I may have lit the match, but you're the one who built the fire." They stood there for a long moment, neither speaking, just sharing a quiet understanding. Around them, life moved on, but for Alana, this moment felt suspended in time. A bridge between the day her life had nearly collapsed and the life she was living now. Finally, Keanu glanced down the street and said softly, "Can we walk?" They began walking slowly down the quiet side street, the glow of the street lamps casting soft halos on the wet pavement. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain and magnolia blossoms from a nearby yard. Alana felt her steps steady with each block, as if the weight she had carried for so long had shifted somewhere lighter. "I never thought I'd see you again," she admitted. "And even if I did, I never imagined being able to tell you what your kindness meant to me." Keanu shook his head gently. "You don't have to. I can see it in the life you've built. You've taken something small and turned it into something that touches hundreds of people. That's more than I could have hoped for." She glanced at him, searching for the right words. "It still doesn't feel real that a stranger could walk into a cafe one night and change everything." His eyes crinkled with a quiet smile. "Life's funny that way. Sometimes the smallest doors open to the biggest rooms." They stopped at the corner where their paths would part. Alana looked at him, the man who had appeared out of the rain all those months ago, carrying not just money but belief. Belief that she and Malik could rise again. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady but full. "Not just for what you did that night, but for seeing me when I felt invisible." Keanu gave a small nod, his gaze warm. "Never stop doing what you're doing, Alana. The world needs more of it." She watched as he crossed the street, blending into the dim glow of the city. No fanfare, no announcement, just the same quiet presence that had stepped into her life and altered its course forever. When she turned toward home, the sound of Malik's laughter waiting behind her door filled her mind. She knew she would tell him one day about the man from the cafe, the one who taught her that even in the hardest seasons, there are people willing to stand in the rain for you. And for the first time in years, Alana didn't just feel grateful. She felt certain that her story, and Malik's, was only just beginning. A week after the awards ceremony, Alana received a call from an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end was warm, measured, and instantly recognizable. Keanu asked if she could meet him for coffee, this time at a small corner cafe in her neighborhood that had seen better days. She arrived to find him seated at a quiet table by the window, a folder resting beside his cup. After exchanging a few pleasantries, he leaned forward slightly. "I've been thinking," he began, "about how your story isn't just about surviving, it's about transforming. And I think we can build something that helps other people do the same." Her brows lifted with curiosity. "What do you mean?" He opened the folder, revealing a set of sketches and notes. "A community cafe and resource center. Part of it would serve affordable, healthy meals. The other part would connect people with job training, legal advice, childcare referrals, and medical resources. I'd fund the startup and operating costs for the first 3 years, but..." He paused, smiling faintly. "I want you to run it." Alana blinked, momentarily at a loss for words. "Me? Why me?" "Because you know what it's like to sit on both sides of the table," he replied. "You've been the person in need and you've been the one giving help. That combination can't be taught in a classroom." The idea was overwhelming, yet strangely natural. She thought of her years working in cafes, of the parents she now guided at the hospital, of Mrs. Green's kitchen table where she'd learned the value of a listening ear. The thought of blending all of it into one place stirred something deep inside her. It would be more than a cafe, she murmured. Keanu nodded. It would be a beacon, a place where people feel seen, where they can come in for a cup of coffee and leave with hope. Her fingers traced the edge of the sketches, eyes catching on a small detail in the corner, a play area labeled Malik's Corner. She smiled, imagining her son's name on the wall, a place where children could play while their parents found the help they needed. "Where do we start?" she asked, her voice firm with a mix of excitement and resolve. Keanu's smile widened. "Right now." The following week, they began walking through potential locations. Keanu insisted the building had to be in the heart of the neighborhood, close enough for people to reach on foot or by bus. They toured an old brick storefront that had been vacant for years. Its windows were clouded with dust, and the faded sign above the door still bore the name of a long-gone bakery. Alana stepped inside and inhaled the faint scent of flour that seemed to linger in the air. The wooden floors creaked beneath her shoes, and sunlight poured in from the tall front windows, casting warm stripes across the worn countertops. She could already see tables filled with people sharing meals, volunteers chatting with families, and a small bulletin board covered in flyers for free classes and support groups. Keanu stood quietly beside her, letting her take it in. "It has good bones," he said, "and more importantly, it feels like a place that remembers kindness." Over the next few days, they met with contractors, architects, and a local artist who offered to paint a mural on one wall. Keanu insisted the space should reflect the neighborhood's culture, its colors, its history, its spirit. Alana agreed wholeheartedly, sketching ideas for a wall featuring portraits of everyday heroes, nurses, teachers, single parents, and community elders. Malik came along to one of the meetings, darting around the empty space and announcing where the play corner should go. "Here," he said firmly, pointing to a sunny patch near the back, "so moms can see their kids while they drink coffee." His confidence made both Keanu and Alana laugh, but they kept his suggestion. Funding moved swiftly. Keanu handled the legal and financial details with quiet efficiency, while Alana focused on building partnerships with local nonprofits and resource networks. She made calls late into the night, speaking to food suppliers, medical clinics, and community volunteers. Every yes she received added another brick to the dream they were constructing. By the end of the month, the once-forgotten bakery was stripped down to its sturdy frame, ready for its transformation. Standing in the doorway one evening, Alana felt the weight of what they were creating. It wasn't just a building, it was a promise. A place that would outlive both of them if they did it right. She glanced at Keanu, who was studying the space with a quiet smile. "We're really doing this?" she whispered. "We are," he replied. "And it's only the beginning." Construction began in earnest. The sound of hammers, saws, and laughter filled the air as volunteers joined the crew. Retired carpenters offered their skills, high school students helped paint walls, and local cafe owners donated spare tables and chairs. It felt less like a project and more like a neighborhood raising its own home. Alana spent her mornings at the hospital, her afternoons on site, and her evenings planning menus and schedules. She wanted the cafe to serve fresh, healthy meals but keep prices low, or free for anyone who couldn't pay. The Resource Center section began taking shape too, with shelves for donated books, a small office for social workers, and a computer corner where parents could apply for jobs or benefits. One afternoon, as she reviewed a shipment of donated kitchen equipment, Keanu arrived carrying a box. Inside were crisp white aprons embroidered with the name they'd chosen together, The Hearth. The name spoke to warmth, nourishment, and belonging, the kind of place where no one felt like a stranger. When opening day finally came, the streets outside filled with neighbors. Children clutched balloons, elders hugged Alana, and Malik stood proudly beside the ribbon, scissors in hand. Keanu quietly took a spot at the edge of the crowd, watching her shine in the center of it all. She gave a short speech, thanking everyone who had put their time, love, and energy into making this place real. "The hearth is not just my dream," she said. "It's ours, a table big enough for the whole neighborhood." When the ribbon was cut, people poured inside. The smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the air, mingling with the buzz of conversation. Families sat together, volunteers served meals, and at the back, a young mother spoke with a social worker about housing options. Later that night, when the cafe finally quieted, Alana and Keanu sat at one of the new wooden tables, mugs of tea warming their hands. Outside, the street lights cast a soft glow on the mural of neighborhood heroes. "You built this?" Keanu said. "We built this," she corrected, smiling at him. He nodded, content. "Then let's make sure it never stops giving." In that moment, Alana knew the hearth was more than a building. It was the living proof of what could happen when kindness met purpose and decided to stay. The morning sun spilled over the street, catching on the fresh paint of the hearth's front sign. Alana arrived before dawn, unlocking the door and breathing in the faint scent of coffee grounds and warm bread left from last night's baking. The kitchen was already humming. Volunteers chopping vegetables, stirring pots, and setting out baskets of rolls still steaming from the oven. Malik was there too, proudly wearing one of the white aprons Keanu had given them, bustling between tables to arrange salt shakers and flowers in small jars. By the time the doors opened, a line had formed outside. Families chatted quietly, neighbors waved to each other, and a few curious passers-by peeked in through the windows. Alana greeted each person with a smile as they stepped inside. The room filled quickly, the low hum of voices growing into a warm, lively buzz. Volunteers moved between tables with plates of food, hearty soups, fresh bread, roasted vegetables, and baked chicken. Amid the crowd, a man in a worn denim jacket lingered at the entrance, holding the hand of a small boy who clutched an inhaler. Alana noticed the hesitation in his eyes, the way he looked around as if trying to decide whether he belonged. She walked over and introduced herself, inviting them to sit. His name was Darius, and his son Elijah had been struggling with asthma for months. As they talked, Darius admitted he'd been skipping his own meals to afford Elijah's medication. The words caught in his throat, and Alana recognized the quiet desperation behind them. She didn't hesitate. "You don't have to choose between food and medicine here," she told him. She explained that the Hearth partnered with a local clinic to help families cover essential prescriptions. Within minutes, she had arranged for Elijah's next 3 months of inhalers to be provided at no cost. When Darius tried to thank her, his voice trembled. Alana simply smiled and placed a warm plate of food in front of him. "Eat," she said. "You're family now." In the far corner, Keanu watched the exchange without stepping forward. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried a quiet pride. This was exactly what he had hoped for, a place where kindness could take root, far beyond his own presence. The morning flowed into afternoon without a single lull. Every table stayed full, but the atmosphere never felt rushed. Children colored at a corner table stocked with crayons and paper, their laughter rising above the soft music playing in the background. Volunteers moved with practiced ease, delivering plates, refilling water glasses, and stopping to chat with guests. Alana moved through the cafe like she'd been born to do it, her years in food service now intertwined with a deeper purpose. She knew nearly every person's name by the time they left. For the few who slipped in quietly and tried to leave the same way, she made sure they left with more than just a meal, a loaf of bread wrapped in parchment, a bag of fresh fruit, or the number of someone who could help with rent assistance. At one point, Mrs. Green, the elderly neighbor who had watched Malik so many nights when Alana worked double shifts, came through the door. She was dressed in her best Sunday hat, leaning on her cane but walking with determination. Malik spotted her first and ran to give her a hug. Soon she was seated at a table near the front, enjoying a slice of pie and holding court with half a dozen other guests. In the kitchen, Alana took a moment to catch her breath, leaning against the counter with a cup of tea. Through the serving window, she spotted Darius helping Elijah with his lunch, patiently cutting pieces small enough for the boy's small hands. There was something in that sight that struck her deeply. She'd been in that place, scraping by, making sacrifices no one else saw, and now she was in a position to help. The weight of that realization filled her with gratitude and quiet resolve. Keanu remained on the sidelines, speaking briefly with volunteers and occasionally stepping outside to greet a few people in the line still forming for the evening meal. He didn't want attention, didn't need thanks. Every time his gaze drifted back to Alana, his expression softened. She was thriving, and that mattered more to him than any recognition. By the time the lunch crowd began to thin, word had already spread through the neighborhood. People were telling their friends, their cousins, anyone who needed help. The hearth was open, and everyone was welcome. Late in the day, a young woman came in holding the hand of a little girl who couldn't have been more than 5. The child's cheeks were flushed, her breaths short and shallow. Alana noticed immediately and went over, gently asking if they'd like to sit down. The woman explained quietly that her daughter had severe asthma, and the inhaler was almost empty. She'd been stretching doses to make it last until payday. Alana listened without judgment. She excused herself for a moment, disappearing into the small office behind the kitchen. When she returned, she had a voucher in hand, one that could be used at the local pharmacy for a full month's supply, no questions asked. She knelt to meet the girl's eyes and said, "You're going to breathe easier soon, sweetheart." The little girl smiled weakly, but her mother's eyes filled with tears. Moments like that reminded everyone why this place existed. It wasn't just about food. It was about lifting a weight off someone's shoulders, even for a little while. Keanu saw the exchange from where he stood near the door. He didn't interrupt, but a small, proud smile touched his lips. This was why he had believed in Alana from the moment they met in that rain-soaked cafe. She carried kindness in every gesture, in every word. By closing time, the last plates were washed, the floors swept, and the aroma of baked bread lingered in the air. Volunteers gathered at one of the long tables, sharing a late meal and swapping stories from the day. Laughter echoed in the nearly empty room, a sign that this was more than a workplace, it was a family. Alana stood at the counter, looking out at the empty chairs. Her heart was full, her body tired, but in the best possible way. She glanced toward Keanu, who was pulling on his coat. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange was an understanding. This was only the beginning. Outside, the street was damp from a light evening rain, the cafe's sign glowing warmly against the night. The hearth had opened its doors, and with it a new chapter had begun, one that promised hope, dignity, and the quiet power of shared humanity. The sun poured through the wide front windows of the hearth, casting a golden glow across the long tables where families chatted over steaming bowls of soup. The cafe had changed in small ways over the years. Fresh paint on the walls, new chairs donated by a local carpenter, a small stage for community music nights. But the spirit of the place had never wavered. Malik moved easily among the tables, taller now, his once fragile frame replaced by the confident posture of a young man in his 20s. He carried a tray of plates to the kitchen, greeting guests by name as he passed. His laughter was deep, warm, and often contagious, and the older volunteers would still tell newcomers about the boy he used to be. Sickly, quiet, fighting for breath between bouts of play. Now he was in his second year of college, studying public health with a focus on community outreach. Every break from school brought him back here, back to the place that had given him a second chance. It wasn't out of obligation. It was gratitude. Malik had grown up knowing that his life was the result of a chain reaction that started long before he could understand it. Alana stood behind the counter, watching her son work. The pride she felt wasn't loud or showy. It was the deep, quiet kind that settled in her chest and made her eyes sting. She remembered the days when even the idea of him reaching adulthood felt impossible. She remembered the weight of unpaid bills, the panic of empty pill bottles, the rain-soaked afternoon that changed everything. That day had been a spark, a moment so small it could have been forgotten. But instead, it grew. It grew into a network of kindness that had touched not just their lives, but the lives of hundreds of families. Alana thought about how fragile life can feel, and how strong it can become when people lift each other up. From the kitchen, Malik emerged again, this time carrying a plate of fresh bread to a young mother sitting alone with her toddler. He placed it down with a smile and a gentle word, the way his mother had once done for him. Watching him, Alana realized the most beautiful part of their story. The kindness hadn't stopped with her. It had taken root in him, and now it was spreading even further. Later that afternoon, when the lunch rush had calmed and the clatter of dishes gave way to the low hum of conversation, Alana stepped outside to the small garden behind the cafe. The herb beds Malik had helped plant years ago were thriving, their scent drifting in the warm breeze. She sat on the worn bench, feeling the sun on her face, letting herself think about the journey that had brought them here. She thought of Keanu, of how he had remained true to his word, never making their partnership about recognition or headlines. His name was on no sign, no press release, but his presence was everywhere. In the new fridge that kept meals fresh for longer, in the scholarship fund that quietly helped employees continue their education, in the renovation of the upstairs rooms so struggling parents could have a safe place to sleep while they found their footing. Alana often wondered if he knew how much of an impact his single decision had made. Maybe he did, but she also knew that for people like him, knowing wasn't the point. Doing the right thing was its own reward. Malik joined her on the bench, still in his apron, sipping from a bottle of water. He looked around the garden with a small smile. "You ever think about how different things would be if that day at the cafe never happened?" he asked. "All the time," she said, "and it's why I make sure we never waste the gift we were given." He nodded, quiet for a moment before saying, "That's why I'm going into public health. I want to be the person who sees the problem before it's too late. The person who shows up for someone else, the way people showed up for us." Alana reached over, squeezing his hand. "You already are." The sounds of the cafe drifted out to them. A burst of laughter from the dining room, the scrape of chairs on the floor, the hum of life carrying on. She knew that even years from now, when Malik had his own life far from here, this place would remain. It would be a beacon, not just for those who needed help, but for those who wanted to give it. Kindness, she realized, was the one thing that multiplied when shared, and here, in this little corner of the city, it had found a permanent home. Evening settled in slowly, painting the sky in shades of gold and lavender. Inside, the last families finished their meals, lingering at tables as if reluctant to leave. Alana stood near the counter, watching Malik laugh with a group of younger volunteers. They looked up to him now, just as children had once looked up to her for guidance. She thought back to the moment in that small cafe years ago when a stranger had pressed an envelope into her hands. That simple gesture had been the spark, one act of kindness that set off a chain reaction she could never have predicted. It had paid for Malik's medication, which gave him his health back. It had led to the phone call from the foundation, the job at the hospital, the community work, and, finally, to this cafe where hope was served alongside every plate. Keanu still visited from time to time, usually without warning. Sometimes he came in during the quiet hours, taking a seat in the back, smiling softly as he watched the place fill with life. Tonight, she half expected to see him walk through the door. Even if he didn't, she carried his gift with her every day. Not the money, but the reminder that compassion could change the course of someone's life. Before locking up for the night, Alana stepped out into the cool air and looked up at the stars. Her voice carried a quiet conviction as she spoke, more to herself than anyone else. If someone gave you a miracle, you pass it on. That's how the world changes. Her eyes returned to the cafe's glowing windows, where Malik was wiping down the last table. She knew he was ready to take up that mission, just as she had, and she wanted everyone who heard her story to know they could do the same. To those listening now, she offered a simple request. Think of the person who once showed you kindness, and find a way to be that person for someone else. Share your own story of kindness in the comments and let others feel the ripple. And if you believe in the power of compassion to change lives, join this community, subscribe, and be part of the miracles yet to come.